Welcome to this practice with me. In this video, I'll run through the entire process of practicing my musical instrument, the cello, in a week. I've not seen any videos quite like this one on YouTube, so whilst I'm still a student cellist and not a professional, I think this has some value in starting a dialogue around musical instrument practice methods and providing a communal opportunity to practice alongside another student. I work full-time in a university as an academic teaching music and the arts, and also work in a conservatoire part-time as a learning technologist. So beyond the cello, I have many years' experience of music education. The central section of this video is the 1-hour silent practice with me, where you can practice your musical instrument alongside me. As with my Study With Me videos, the benefit of practicing alongside someone or mirroring can provide increased accountability, focus and engagement to carry on at moments when you might decide to stop if practicing on your own. Think of it like being in a practice room, perhaps in a university or a rehearsal space, where you are practicing alongside many other musicians who you can hear through the walls and see in the corridors. I've divided this video into chapters so you can engage with the elements that are most helpful to you. Firstly, you'll see me just after I've had my instrumental lesson, where I write up the short notes I've jotted down during the lesson itself. Essentially, I do a brain dump to try and capture as much information from the lesson as possible, so I hold on to this advice throughout the week. Then you'll see me working on my practice plan. This is where I break down the things I need to work on this week into smaller chunks, to encourage deliberate practice. The value of a practice plan is that it takes the unknown out of practice and allows you to plan your time. The act of writing down your practice can take away some of the uncertainty we might experience in practice, perhaps a reluctance to engage with a tricky passage. When the information is written down in a practice plan, I find this reduces the emotional elements of practice, which otherwise might result in me avoiding practicing a difficult aspect of a piece. I've only just started working with a practice plan, so this is definitely a work in progress for me, and I will refine this process over time. We then move on to our 1-hour practice segment. This will be silent, but you will see me practicing with titles on the screen indicating how I'm dividing up my time. The final part of the video will include my reflections on my practice week, what I've discovered and how my practice went. I'll also try to identify something I can take forward to my lesson or to future practice. So that's the plan for this video. Let's get started. Here I am immediately after my lesson, writing up the rough notes I jotted down whilst the lesson was taking place. Both making rough notes during the lesson and writing these up in longhand after the lesson is crucial for me since I'm very forgetful. The act of writing up my rough notes and anything else I can recall from the lesson into longer notes of continuous prose consolidates the information, and I find that if I spend time doing this, I rarely need to look back at the long form notes and I recall the information as I practice. The notes are part of the memory process for me, and they are there to refer back to them if I need to. In today's lesson, I had a significant learning moment because I realised that I had misinterpreted an instruction about placement of the left arm. So this week, my practice is pared back in terms of complex repertoire, and I'm trying to reset a technical aspect of my playing, which is the use of arm weight through the fingers to play notes on the fingerboard. Since I had a very productive lesson, absorbing information, and the technical aspects of playing very much play to my interests, I made 7 pages of notes, which is more than I usually would. I then transferred some of the information from my notes into a practice plan. As mentioned earlier, the practice plan is new to me, and therefore there's still lots of potential for development. The practice plan has a number of dimensions. I divide the week into 2, as per my teacher's instructions, and each day includes segments of time for basic conditioning exercises such as open string work, scales, and technical works such as shifting and vibrato. I then incorporate some of the details from my notes I wrote up after my lesson relating to the repertoire I'm working on. So I try to divide the work across the days of the week, but this is a task I'm currently not well practiced at because it requires fine judgment. Some tasks might be technically very challenging and require practice every day, whilst others might only need 2 or 3 days of practice to master. I also need to leave space for experimentation and reflection in my practice plan, because I may find a solution to a problem through experimentation, which means that I can master a particular skill more quickly. Or it may be that I realise that I am not practicing a particular element efficiently and decide to make a change the next day I practice in order to make progress on this. Halfway through the week and at the end of the week, I schedule a run through. It's really important that I timetable this in my practice plan because I'm a learner whose preference is detail rather than the bigger picture. So I often procrastinate on the playthrough of a piece because I feel I've not yet fixed all of the technical problems. However, a playthrough is crucial to assess your progress and identify areas which still need work. This week specifically, I'm focusing on transferring arm weight through my fingers in the left hand to play notes on the fingerboard. So I start by tackling very simple passages from my repertoire. And as I progress through the week, I hope to incorporate more complex passages in the repertoire. I also made the decision to focus on the lower positions of the cello, since this is primarily where I noticed the problem of arm placement. Since the arm is raised to a greater degree in the higher positions, I thought it would be too confusing to tackle both areas of the fingerboard at once. So the higher positions and thumb position is something I might leave until the second half of the practice week, once I'm feeling more comfortable with the concept of arm weight transferring through the fingers in the left hand. Now that I've got my practice plan, I'm ready to begin practicing. So we'll move now to the next chapter of this video, which is my 1-hour practice session in which I invite you to practice alongside me. There'll be no sound and only visuals on screen, so you can keep the video running. I'll include some information on screen as to how I'm dividing up my practice session, but you might decide to organise your practice differently. So now that we're ready, let's get practicing. How did your practice session go? I'd love to hear from you in the comments so we can develop our playing together. Here are some reflections on my practice session. First of all, I was able to identify a point of development which has occurred over the past year. For this practice, I was in a different location using a different seat. I've been playing the cello for just over 2 years, and in the past, where I've used different seats, my intonation has been thrown off because I wasn't able to maintain the position of the cello as in practice. However, my playing is developing because my intonation wasn't affected by what was probably a very inappropriate practice stool. So much so that one of the points of reflection from my practice was to bring a cushion for my next practice session because the stool I was using was very uncomfortable. A second point of reflection was the level of detail in my practice plan. I'd indicated some exercises in shifting and vibrato that I intended to work through. However, because I was under some time pressure recording the footage of my practice for this video, I didn't reread all of my notes, including re-watching some video exercises my teacher has provided me with in the past. So I wondered if I should have incorporated more practice with vibrato in fourth position. And in practicing shifting, I could have applied the principles to my repertoire earlier, which would have meant that I transitioned from technical exercises to the repertoire sooner. This highlights another point of development from my practice session, which is to spend less time working on technical exercises independent of repertoire and instead to apply the techniques to passages in my repertoire. This would mean that I am practicing more efficiently and also not procrastinating on learning new repertoire. In practicing one of my studies, Sebastian Lee, I became aware that my fourth finger was locking as I was trying to anticipate playing the next note. This was a skill I was specifically trying to make a start at training out in this practice session, so it was good to be aware of this. In my repertoire, I'm just starting to learn the swan, and I wasn't strict enough with myself to focus on the foundational work throughout. The arm weight and getting familiar with the notes. I rushed on to playing vibrato in places, which is the next stage of my work on this piece. By doing this, it will take me longer to do the foundational work, and I need to learn a little patience. As soon as I began practicing, I realised that it would have been helpful for me to use a mirror in practice, given that I was concerned about my arm placement and how this affected transferring my arm weight through my fingers. This is something I made a note of with the intention of changing in my next practice session. Subsequently, when editing this video, I did spot a number of cello playing crimes, so making use of video, even for visual purposes, can be helpful. Overall, I felt this was an effective practice, though over time I could improve efficiency in my practice. And I think this starts with developing my practice plan and the finer judgments that I mentioned in planning my practice. I felt that I began to address the central theme of my practice, which was transferring the arm weight through my fingers. I increased my awareness of several aspects of my playing relating to this, which I can address if needed in future practice sessions. And I identified some changes I would like to make for my next practice session to aid my development. What you're seeing now is my second day of practice. As per my reflections from my first practice session, I made several changes, such as using a mirror whilst playing and grabbing a cushion for my seat. I also made sure that I read through my notes to remind myself of the detail of the lesson and notes I'd made on watching the technical videos my teacher had recommended to remind myself of the detail of the exercises. In this practice, the transference of arm weight into my fingers felt more natural, and I noticed an improvement in the sound of my playing. I could feel the shift of weight between my fingers, and my fourth finger was no longer locking as I was anticipating playing the next note to a lesser degree. In shifting, I tried singing the note before the shift, which increased the accuracy of my shift. From reviewing the video and editing, my vibrato seems very feeble, and I wondered if greater arm weight and consistent daily practice of the vibrato exercises would improve this, so it's something I'll incorporate into future practice sessions. The mirror made a significant difference in a number of ways. Firstly, I was able to check my arm position quickly whilst playing. For example, in the higher positions, my elbow felt unnaturally high, but I was aware that this was what was needed to maintain a straight arm. However, I was shying away from raising my elbow, and when I checked in the mirror, I found indeed that this was needed to maintain a straight arm, so I was able to make the physical correction with my arm very quickly. My little finger also has a tendency to lock. I think this might be a result of me playing the piano when I was a child. I was aware of this before the practice session, but it made me wonder if I should bring my elbow further forward to try and eliminate this. I jotted this down as something to explore in a future practice session. A very significant learning point was not relating to the left arm, but to my right arm bowing, which I also noticed in the mirror. I realised that some work I'd invested in bowing several months ago had not stuck, and that this needed regular engagement, not just a couple of weeks of practice on a one-off basis. If you're still watching this video, thanks for sticking with me. I hope you had a good practice. Let me know how this went in the comments. If you found this video helpful and want other Practice With Me videos in the future, perhaps with different timings, then do let me know and I can develop a series like my Study With Me videos. Thanks again for watching and happy practicing!